Focus then on Nigel Farage and reform, because since bagging a handful of MPs in the election, the party now says it's bigger than the Conservatives, hitting, they say, yesterday, more than 170,000 members. Both Tory and the Labour Party are nervous about what Mr Farage is doing and why he seems to be pulling in so much support. As we've been talking about, in recent days, he's repeatedly attacked the government over what's become known as the grooming gang scandal. Dreadful abuse of young girls by groups of men of mainly Pakistani origin that the authorities did little about, sometimes ignored, before investigations and some inquiries in recent years. But Farage has been packing venues around the country, like at the racetrack in Chelmsford in Essex yesterday, where I spoke to him and some of those giving up their weekend to listen to his speech.
The Reform Party's a breath of fresh air, quite frankly.
Why'd you say that?
Because they're saying what the people want to hear. That's what we want. We want to move on. We want progression. We want more finances coming into this country.
I feel angry. I'm feeling emotionally angry. Actually trying to talk to you and keep my composure.
He absolutely speaks for how a lot of people feel at the moment, you know, and I don't think there's anyone else that is doing that.
It's Nigel Farage for now. Arguably, it's already got broader than that. I think certainly by 2029, this will be, as he says, a political revolution.
Well, then we sat down with Mr Farage himself. Some of the people here we've spoken to this afternoon, though, seem to be coming to you because they're very angry. They're very angry about the state of the country. Do you think that's what it's about?
As they should be. As they should be. You know, the reopening of the debate around the, well, they call it the grooming gang scandal, but it's not. It's the mass rape scandal. I just think people ask themselves, what has happened to our country? How could this possibly have happened? Why did everybody want to cover it up? Why has there been no full public inquiry? People are angry about that, yes, and they're right to be. Absolutely right to be. They're also angry economically. We are getting poorer. You know, if you look at the last 8 quarters, GDP per capita is falling in 6 of them. And it coincides with a period of record net legal migration. Mass immigration not only makes it tough for young people to get a house, not only makes it very difficult to see a GP, not only makes our roads and infrastructure struggle to cope, it's making us poorer. And I think the anger isn't directed at the Labour or Conservative parties. I think people increasingly regard them as a uni party. So you're right, they're coming to us because they're angry, but they're not coming to us to stick 2 fingers up to the establishment. They're coming to us because they think we've got the courage to do what's necessary to turn this around.
But what do you plan to do with that? I mean, what's your dream scenario for 2025?
2025, it's to build the structure of the party, you know. And since really August of last year, we've tried with nothing to build branch structure, to put in place a very rigorous, and I mean extremely rigorous, vetting procedure for candidates at all levels, because that was the big failing, you know, of what we had at the last election. Huge failing, no question about that. 2025 was about getting that machine actually working, to start to win some victories. Our ultimate goal, and I'm not joking, is to win the next general election. You
say you've done it with nothing. You have had a very useful thing, the support and the oxygen of the support from someone who's on his way back to the White House, and Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who just happens to also own one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. Now, you mentioned there people's anger over the grooming scandal, as it's known, and it is well understood now that there were failings over many, many years. There's no question about that. Everybody understands that that has taken place, and nobody would excuse what has happened for a second. However, your political friend, Elon Musk, has made pretty outlandish claims about exactly what happened there. And he wrote online that the Prime Minister was complicit in the rape of Britain. Is it acceptable for the world's richest man, with a friend on his way back to the White House, to spread those kinds of misleading and what many people would think are pretty offensive claims online?
Well, you either believe in free speech or you don't. Now, free speech has its limits, obviously, incitement being perhaps the clearest example of what's not acceptable. Remember, before Musk came along and bought Twitter, free speech was dying on social media. And if you criticise the lockdowns that were happening in this country, your accounts were being suspended. So Musk describes himself as a free speech absolutist. Now, what he's referring to there specifically is that in 2008, Keir Starmer had just been appointed as Director of Public Prosecutions, and there was a case brought before them of alleged mass rape of young girls that did not lead to a prosecution. I don't know the rights and wrongs of that any more than you do.
But the point,
but if you believe in free speech, people are allowed to have an opinion.
But as you just said, free speech does not have a completely unlimited bind.
No.
Is it acceptable? So I'll just ask this again, because Elon Musk seems to be very busy making these kinds of very, very provocative claims about British politicians. He said Keir Starmer was complicit in the rape of Britain. He said that Jess Phillips, who's a government minister who's worked her whole career helping victims of abuse, he said that she was a rape genocide apologist. This afternoon he said that she's a wicked witch, that she is pure evil. Is it acceptable for somebody with Elon Musk's platform to say those kinds of things?
I tell you what, those on the left have thrown these sort of jibes at the right for many, many decades and will go on doing so.
But I'm asking you about the specific
I would say this
thing.
to you.
Is that acceptable?
If it turns out, I'm going to caveat this, if it turns out that Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions, did, in effect, not prosecute a case for fear of what it would do to community relations, for fear that it would provoke the charge of racism, well, if that's the case, then he is open to be criticised. And we all criticise in our own way. Doesn't mean that I would... And by the way, the fact that Musk supports me and supports reform doesn't mean, as two grown-ups, we have to agree with everything the other says.
But the evidence actually from Keir Starmer's time at the Crown Prosecution Service was actually he put in place specialist prosecutors to deal with this kinds of problem. He did prosecute many cases like this. Now, as we've discussed, nobody would deny that many vulnerable girls were appallingly let down by people across the piece. But my question to you again is, I think, as a senior politician, as somebody who wants to get to number 10...
I really don't think let down is an acceptable way of putting this. I mean, it's as if, it's all a little bit of a pity. No, what happened was absolutely, truly be awful in a way that we ought to be actually ashamed of. Ashamed of, in every way.
But the question here that I'm asking you is not about what happened in the grooming scandal. As you rightly say, everybody will agree that it was appalling. The truth about that came out over a period of many years. But is it...
Drip feed, drip feed, drip feed. No big, full national public inquiry. Jess Phillips has denied that. The Conservative administration before equally denied that.
But the question that I'm...
And by the way, our American friends, and Musk is one of them, look at what's happened with utter disbelief.
But there is a difference, is there not, between expressing a view and circulating claims to millions of people with a megaphone that Musk has that are misleading and offensive, saying that somebody was complicit in the rape of the country. And I
don't know the truth of what happened in 2008. Let's find out.
So you think it's acceptable for somebody to say that the British Prime Minister was complicit in the rape of the country?
I believe in free speech, even if what people say is offensive. If you find it offensive, if most people find it offensive, would I rather live in a world where we're free to cause offence than a world in which free speech and debate get shut down? I know which of those two I prefer.
But would you tell Elon Musk that he is wrong? So I know you've distanced yourself from his comments about Tommy Robinson.
Do you know what? Real friends, when they meet face to face, have conversations, and they agree to agree, and sometimes they agree to disagree. And that is what open society and free speech is all about.
But have you, or anyone in your team, said to Elon Musk that his calls for Tommy Robinson to be released from prison, a convicted offender, somebody on the far right who you yourself work very hard to distance yourself from, have you told him that he's wrong about that?
I think you're missing the point. The point is the fact that he supports me politically and supports reform doesn't mean I have to agree with every single statement he makes on X. And I think you're getting bogged down in this. I will, at the inauguration, have a conversation with him on a variety of things. This will no doubt be one of them. But I think the media are getting too hung up on this. Frankly, what he says about other people, what his views on electric vehicles are, or whatever it may be, isn't relevant.
But I suppose what I'm asking you about is whether you, and I know you're somebody who cares about politicians' safety, for example, you and I have discussed that before. Yeah. You've been the target of abuse yourself on many occasions. It's a straightforward question. Do you think it's acceptable for a government minister to be accused of being a rape genocide supporter, being called pure evil, and by the elected Prime Minister of this country to be accused of being complicit in rape?
These are very, very tough terms. You know, if you believe they're insightful, if you do believe they're insightful, then they go beyond the line.
But do you think they've gone beyond the line?
You know, in public life, tough things get said. They get said by both sides of the debate. You're right, this man happens to be the richest man in the world. But equally, the fact that he's bought Twitter now actually gives us a place where we can have a proper, open debate about many things. And hey, even Facebook, even Meta are adjusting to the modern world. Free speech is back. We may find it offensive, but it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
You can tell that many in not just the British government, but in other governments around the world are sort of holding their breath to see what your other American friend, Donald Trump, is going to do when he gets back to the White House. I just wonder, what conversations have you had with him since he won the election? And I suppose, how do you think he will approach the UK?
So, two things to say. Number one, he's prepared for it this time. You know, I can tell you the whole mood at Mar-a-Lago for the last 18 months has been a much more organised, disciplined one, and planning for the future. You know, he's got up to 3,000 appointments he can make as president. They've been working on this for over a year. So he goes in with a professional team. He goes in with a new sense of calm about him himself and the way that he conducts himself. And I particularly think since the assassination attempts, he's become a much calmer person. He has got a plan, and it's quite a radical plan. He will, on the world stage, do what he did in the first term and try and bring peace. This is the guy that oversaw the Abraham Accords. This is the guy that crossed the line and walked into North Korea. The Ukraine war will end. It will end. Even Zelensky now, the Ukrainian president, says, yes, it will end. As far as we're concerned, this may be the last ever American president with a deep emotional attachment to these islands. And so, yes, he of course is talking about tariffs, which is one example of something that could happen that could really hurt us. It's all avoidable. It's all avoidable. You know...
If?
Well, I think we have to think, I think Starmer has to think about two things very hard. Firstly, does he want us to be tied ever closer to a failing Europe or tied to a booming America? And secondly, I think the one thing Keir Starmer needs to really think about is this. We're the biggest foreign investor in America. They're the biggest foreign investor here. Trade is important. Our cultural ties are deeper today than they ever have been at any point in history.
How would you describe your, some people call it a bromance, you know, with Trump and Musk?
I made a decision in 2016 to put my head over the parapet to support Trump. I have stuck with him through thick and thin. At times it's not been easy. Maybe at times I was the only public figure in Britain that would stand up for him. And Trump is an old school businessman in a sense that if you're loyal to him, he's loyal to you. And that's what friendships are based on.
And is his friend, Elon Musk, now your friend, and is he going to give you millions of pounds?
Well, that's a real question, isn't it? Now, what, I mean, you know, forget about the $100 million being talked about in the newspapers.
Are you going to give you money?
That is for the birds.
Is he going to give you money?
He may well do. He may well do. But it's got to be legal. He's got to be comfortable with it. He may well give us money. Whether he does or not, I'll tell you what he gives us. With huge numbers of young people, he makes us look cool.
Is the reason you hope he's going to give you money, is that why you don't want to criticise him?
I think I've made it perfectly clear that I don't agree with everything he stands for, but I do believe in free speech. I think he's a hero, and I said that well before any potential money was offered.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking to us.